I just finished playing Scarlet Nexus, and I gotta say, I did enjoy the game. It wasn't like outstanding by any means, but it was actually a very solid game. And I think it really caters towards anime fans. The paneling for the cutscenes is kind of in a manga style type of art, and the voice acting definitely resonates anime-esque vibes, as well as the character development and the way the characters interact with each other. The story is actually pretty decent about halfway through the game. I would say it starts off fairly weak, but if you can muster to get through the first quarter of the story, it does start to ramp up. It does start to get a little bit better and eventually performs very well near the middle of the story and end of the story. And everything starts to make sense and come together. All the puzzle pieces come together, but ends fairly strong in the story and the plot. I would say it's pretty predictable in some cases, but in very few cases throughout the story, I think there were some things that you just really needed to see the full story before things started to connect. But for the most part, it was a pretty predictable story. It does have to do with time travel and how a person would do anything to travel back in time to save someone they love or someone they care about. It is a blueprint of a story that we have seen before in TV shows and movies. I don't know if we've seen anything like this in a video game per se. I don't think it does anything super innovative, but I think for what it is and for what they were trying to portray, I think it delivers very, very well on, and it doesn't disappoint. To summarize what this game is about, you are part of an organization called the OSF, or in other words, the Other Suppression Force, a group that is considered humanity's last line of defense against creatures called others. And you have a choice to choose between the male or female character who have two sides of a story. The story is interconnected during gameplay and during the story itself, but you do get two different perspectives if you play one or the other. I personally played as Yuito Sumeragi, the male character, the male protagonist. I have not played as Kasane, which I will probably play as Kasane off camera just so that I can get the other side of that perspective, but maybe later on down the road after I've taken a break from this game. But basically, these two protagonists have powers called psychokinesis, and they're able to move objects with their mind and use those objects to battle other creatures and basically slam objects into them and damage them. And then you also have what's called the SAS system, which is basically brain communication with your allies in this game. And so you are able to actually take on your allies' abilities or elements, depending on what kind of abilities they have, for a temporary amount of time to apply to your weapon, to be able to use their ability to battle other archetypes and use those abilities as basically weaknesses against those other archetypes to ensure your advantage in battle. And I thought this system was actually really, really cool. I really enjoyed it late game, how you were able to take on multiple abilities at one time and use those abilities as basically pop-ins, where you're able to basically bring in that character who has that ability for a temporary amount of time to basically do an attack. So they come in, do their attack, and then it goes back to the main character. Some of these attacks were very effective against different other archetypes, depending on which others you were battling. I really thought they did a great job with the variety and the innovation to the combat and this SAS system, where you were able to do different things and make it more interesting, more fun, and make it very seamless. It was not hard to use, and I felt like it was just something that was natural in my arsenal. It didn't feel like I had to really force it or anything like that. It just felt like it was there for me to use, and I used it and was able to take advantage of it when I needed it. Kudos to the developers of this game making this type of system and being able to feel like your allies were always with you in battle battle without actually having all of them in battle with you, because you were able to use basically 8 different allies' abilities or elements, but you really could only have 2 physically with you on the field at one time. So I thought it was a fantastic way to feel like you were really part of your platoon in this game, which is what it's called. And in this case, it was Yuito Tsumeragi leading the Yuito platoon, and you were actually a platoon eventually in the late game of 9 people, and you're able to use 8 of their abilities, which really created a sense of camaraderie and connection with some of these side characters, and I really did appreciate that. Although the side characters could have used a little bit more development in their character and their backstories, I felt like with the protagonist Yuito and also Kasane, they did a pretty good job with their backstory and really developing their origins and where they came from. But I felt like the side characters, even though they were likable, could have used a little bit more backstory. Now, they did have what was called bond episodes, and basically in between missions, you were able to talk to some of these side characters or some of these companions of yours and have a little bit of one-on-one time with them, and you're able to essentially bond with them, which increased the ability levels for how their abilities were able to be used on the field. So as you increase your bond with each of these characters, that bond level goes up. I was able to use my companions with higher bond levels in a more advanced way in combat, which did make combat even more interesting. Some of the bond episodes were really good, some of them were terrible, some of them were okay, but the essential use behind these bond episodes I thought was a pretty good idea, and on a base level was actually fantastic. It was a creative way to make combat more interesting, more fun, and more advanced, and once again really made it feel like you were getting to know your platoon, even though some of those episodes were not very fleshed out and really didn't give a whole lot of backstory to the relationships between each of the characters and your main protagonist. It still gave that sense of character development and character bonding. And while battling these creatures called others, there are different types of others, different archetypes. You have your minion others, you have your boss others, you have your mid-tier boss others. It did get a little stale at times, but for the most part, with the SAS system that I just talked about pretty extensively just a bit ago, along with the archetypes you were able to battle, the mix of both really made it interesting throughout the game. Like I said, it did get a little stale at times, but for the most part, I would say for about 90 to 95% of the game, I was still interested in the combat in my 30-ish hour playthrough. Now, if you're expecting a type of game where it's more open world, this is not it. The combat is actually far and few between compared to the story. I would say there's about 50 to 55% cutscenes and about 45 to 50% gameplay. They delved into the story a lot with the cutscenes and with actual footage that wasn't you playing the game, but there were also moments where you got to play the game and actually battle other archetypes and other creatures. In that aspect, I felt like maybe there should have been quite a bit more gameplay, maybe like 10 to 15% more gameplay than there were cutscenes and all that stuff. And I did feel like some of the cutscenes did take away from that so-called magic, because I felt like some of those cutscenes were very long and drawn out and took you away or took you out of the game and out of that gameplay too long, and could definitely push people away from actually playing the game because there are those long cutscenes. Now, granted, you can actually skip every single cutscene in this game if you just absolutely want to go for the gameplay and you want to get the story elements here and there with what's going on in the actual gameplay. I think you could connect the story. I think it would be much harder to connect the story without those cutscenes, but I think it's very much possible just with the types of battles that you have to fight, because at times you are not fighting others. You're actually fighting against Kasane platoon. You're fighting against other platoons, other OSF soldiers. You're also fighting against other soldiers from a place called Seiran in the story. For the most part, you are fighting other creatures or other archetypes in the game, but there will be times in the story where you're actually fighting people for the story's sake to show what is actually happening. So I do believe through just gameplay you could connect with what's happening with the story. There might be some plot holes here and there that you might have missed, or some things that you can't connect, but I think a lot of it would be common sense if you saw the gameplay only and experienced the gameplay only. But with that being said, that brings me to the brain map and the leveling system. I really do feel like the leveling system is very basic. It's nothing special. It's straight up, you fight your way through these small hallway type dungeon crawler levels where they're not very long. It's definitely not an open world. The more creatures you fight, or the more people you fight, the more experience you get to level up, and then you are able to use the points you get from leveling up in your brain map system, which is basically where you can put points into getting new abilities or improving the abilities that you already have. For example, you have your psychokinesis gauge. You're able to use the brain map and put points into nodes that will increase your psychokinesis gauge by 50%, and then another node that'll increase it by another 50% to make it a full 100%. And you are able to put nodes into your brain map system that will give you more consecutive attacks for your basic attack, because in the beginning you're only able to do like 3 consecutive attacks, but as you put more nodes into your brain map attack system, you are able to follow a trail of nodes that will eventually give you 5 consecutive attacks with your basic attacks. So those are just 2 examples of how the brain map system works. In my 30+ hour playthrough, I was not able to fill the whole brain map system. I believe they did that on purpose just so that you could go back and do like their new game plus mode, which is called the EX mode, and continue leveling up your character and fully flesh out that brain map system. It's systems that have been used before, but it's a system that works. It's a system that is very easy to understand, and I believe the brain map system is actually pretty good and does give you game-changing abilities that make the end game much more enjoyable, and I do like that. And I do have to say that I did play the game on very hard to start off with, which is the highest difficulty, and I'll admit I was having a tough time playing this game. It was not enjoyable on very hard, and eventually I did change it to hard, which is the difficulty below very hard. And I would have to say that the difficulty gap between hard and very hard is not very good. Very hard just made this game not enjoyable at all. I could hardly damage any of the enemies, and it made dodging a living hell. It really did. If you were not 99.9% perfect at what you were doing on very hard, you were punished severely for it. And I feel like the punishment was a little bit too harsh, and when I turned it down to hard, I felt like it became a bit too easy. I kept it on hard for the rest of the game just so that I could enjoy the game and enjoy the story a little bit more with some difficulty, because I do like to get some difficulty out of the game, some challenge out of gaming to make it more satisfying. Even on the next highest difficulty on hard in this game, it really didn't feel as satisfying as I wanted it to. It was like just right below that level of satisfying that I wanted out of it. Overall, I think if you do want a bit of a challenge, put it on hard. If you just want to be miserable and have to play almost 100% perfect, put it on very hard. Maybe I'm just not that hardcore of a gamer. Overall, I think this game is very enjoyable. I don't think it's going to be for everyone. The pacing is a little bit off. The cutscenes, like I said before, kind of take you out a little bit and can be standoffish and can potentially cause people to not really enjoy the game with how many cutscenes there are. However, you are able to skip through all of those cutscenes if you absolutely want to, but some of those cutscenes I think are essential to get the full context of the story, even though just through gameplay you could probably piece together what the story is about. And if you enjoy short bursts of gameplay with some character bonding and feel good moments, I think this is something that you could enjoy. Thanks for watching. I appreciate y'all for being here. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. I'll catch y'all in the next video.